First of all, I want to thank each and every one of you for coming. This is our second time we're meeting on the 200-year bicentennial of Terrebonne Parish, the Good Earth. Last time we had it at the Civic Center, we had a wonderful crowd, and today I want to thank everyone for coming. This is so important. And what I'd like to do is open it up with an opening prayer, and if Mr. Jules Hebert would come give us an opening prayer, please stand.
In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Dear O Lord, please bless us that we today have survived another day, that we have a blessed day tomorrow, that we work together, that we love one another, and that we put together aside our differences, and that we're here tonight to enjoy something good, the history of Terrebonne Parish. It's as many bad things as we hear every day. Tonight's going to be a night to hear something good. Thank you all for coming. God bless you. God bless Terrebonne Parish. God bless the administration of Terrebonne Parish. And God bless America. Thank you.
And I'd like to add, God bless the people of Ukraine who are going through living hell with a war. And God bless them, and hope they can sustain. And of course, the United States is doing everything they can. And if I could get Dirk Guidry to lead off the Pledge of Allegiance. To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And I'd like to start by announcing some elected officials and also members of boards. And we have Jessica Domingue, the vice chairman of the council, Danny Babin, Dirk Guidry, ex-parish president Michelle Claudet, director of my office for the parish, Debbie Ordigo. Also directors Candace Malden, CFO Mort Black, which is our coastal guy, Dana Ordigo, human resources, Steve Pondville, safety, Jules Hebert, legal, Chris Pulaski, zoning and planning, Mike Toops, the manager of the parish, and we also have the airport commission, Josh Alford, Colton Casey, Jeff Tuton, Mike Kreller, Mert Pellegrin, ex-director, Earl Hicks, Andrea Dupree, George Ray, and David Norman, which is legal. And it's my honor to introduce Mr. Don Davis, coastal historian, and we've seen Terrebonne Parish go in the last 16, 17 years to absolutely no protection, to 98 miles of levee systems, 13 floodgates, 2 lock systems completed by Terrebonne Parish, and 1 under construction, a $360 million lock system on the HNC. And I want to thank the levee board, Tony Alford, Reggie Dupre, and the entire members of the levee board for a great job. Recently we were awarded, but it's actually going to the Corps, $379 million from the federal government out of $3 billion that's been preliminarily approved, going to the Corps of Engineers to start floodgates in the coastal at Lafourche Parish and at Miners Canal on the east side in Terrebonne Parish. These are about $125 million piece gate. Also the lift, Reach A, which is from Beaumont Ridge and Delage to the intercoastal, to lift J2, Pointe-aux-Chenes to Montague to lift them, and also a floodgate in Miners Canal and a new floodgate in Humble Canal. So Terrebonne Parish is on its way with protection. We presently have 98 miles of levees that protects us at 12.5 feet. Of course, our goal is to get them to our existing floodgates that we built to 18 feet, and then the Corps is going to take everything to 22 feet. And, we've come a long way, and, the history of where we got here is so important to how we got here, from the timber industry to the oil industry to the fishing industry, shrimping, crabbing, oysters, that got us to where we at, and of course the Homer Navigation Canal, which also brought in a lot of salt water, and of course that's the reason for the lock system. The lock system is an environmental structure. It's to stop the salt water from coming into Terrebonne Parish when you have south winds, and to keep it from coming into Terrebonne, and of course that regulates a lot of our tides. Recently, I was at the dedication with the governor of the state of Louisiana and our delegation, which I really want to thank Bretta Lane and Tanner McGee, Jerome Zerang, and Mike Feasey. I've been working with them. We presently have $200 million in projects that's making its way through. This is besides the Corps. That's making its way through the legislature. So our delegation has done a wonderful job. It's not over with. It's still got to go through conference committee, and the governor has to sign it. So we have a lot of projects. We've increased the pump station in Terrebonne. When I took office, the drainage in Terrebonne, as you well know, was deplorable 7-8 years ago. We've added 30 pump stations. 62 of our pump stations are now telemetry and SCADA. You can turn them off and on and operate them from New York City. It's all automated now. And we've come a long way. No pump station had backup generators. They all have it now if they have electric pumps. Every one of them do. So we've come a long way, but it's so important to know the history of Terrebonne. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Don Davis, coastal historian. O'Neill Marlborough's going to introduce him. I'm getting it backwards. I'm taking the sting out of O'Neill's deal. With that, I'm going to introduce O'Neill Marlborough, who just waved me down. Thank you, dear.
Well, first, I'd like to thank Mr. Dove and the Terrebonne 200 Committee and all of you here tonight to allowing us to be here to celebrate the history of the transportation of Terrebonne Parish and to present Cruising Bayou Country. My name, as Gordy mentioned, is O'Neill Marlborough. I'm the Senior Vice President of GIS Engineering and the Chairman of this Transportation Subcommittee that we hear tonight. And I said Senior Vice President. I thought it meant that I had seniority at GIS, but it meant that I'm the oldest one at the GIS. That's what it really means. With us tonight, my fellow subcommittee members is the parish attorney, Mr. Jules Hebert, who's with Hebert and Marceau, and Mr. Josh Alfred. I'm not sure what Josh is at in the back. Josh is with Alfred and Associates and a commissioner at the Homer Terrebonne Airport. And Gordy also introduced already introduced the members of the Airport Commission. I'd like for y'all to stand up, all the commissioners and the executive director, Andrea. Why don't y'all just stand up so everybody will know who they're representing. Part of our presentation tonight is going to talk a little bit about the blimp base. As I got with Andrea, they had a couple of early in them had a few information packages. I produced 20 copies of a group of stuff from the airport, and if I told Andrea if y'all want anybody doesn't get a copy, I didn't know how many people were coming, but if y'all need one, get with her. We're gonna make some more, and it's a nice little package. It's not anything fancy, but it's a brief history of the blimp base. I grew up next to the blimp base. There was no blimps when I grew up. They were all gone, but everybody in the area called it the blimp base. It wasn't the air base, it was the blimp base. And now I know why, because we got pictures to show it what it is. Thank you, guys. Thank y'all. Next, I'm really excited to be able to introduce to y'all my good friend and a friend of the Bayou country, Dr. Donald W. Davis, a renowned coastal historian and no stranger to Terrebonne Parish. Don taught at Nichols when I was going to Nichols way back in 71 to 75. I think he was there in 72 till then. And he has appeared in numerous journals, including the Annals of American Geographers, Shore and Beach, the Journal of Soil and Water Conservation, Louisiana Conservationist, and Louisiana History. He's the co-author of 3 books: the Asian Connection Fusion, which deals with the Asian and Cajun drying shrimp. Very nice, a very interesting book. Good thing for y'all to look at. He has a book called Ain't There No More, kind of like that TV show on Channel 4 every Christmas when they say K and B ain't there no more. Don talks about the coast that ain't there no more. And his recent book, which is Washing Away. So with no further discussion, I want to introduce y'all to Mr. Dr. Don W. Davis, my good friend.
It's nice to see so many here with gray hair, or in my case, very little. And if I mention Minnie Pearl, many of you are going to recognize her name. Dee! Well, I'm not Minnie Pearl. However, I do know Justin Wilson. And Justin used to say, "Mes chers, how y'all are?" Well, I are fine. And what we're about to do is put a 5-point NASCAR harness on your bodies. We are going to ask Captain Kirk to take the Enterprise to warp speed. I have been accused of talking too fast. Everybody else talks too old because I am one of the silent generation. For those young folks, we were born during World War II. Don't ask, but I'll tell you, it's just short of 80. That being said, what we want to do is get this program moving. In the words of a late-night TV host, let's get busy. To do that, we want to recognize that when we look at South Louisiana, there are some dichotomies. There's a Cheniere versus the Deltaic Plain, urban versus rural, and of course, New Orleans versus everything else. That being said, when we look at coastal Louisiana, it's part of an alluvial empire. The western part is the Cheniere Plain. The eastern part is the Delta Plain. And within that, it's a direct result of the habits of the Mississippi River. It drains 31 states, 2 Canadian provinces. The last tributary is at Thompson Creek, north of Baton Rouge. Everything south of that is a distributary. The difference, one's adding river, one's taking off water. Bayou Lafourche, therefore, is a distributary. So when we think about a region, we want to think about its geographic personality. This is 6,000 years of sediment history, which created the Delta Plain. The parish is simply a political unit within this geographic boundary. And you are connected by umbilical cord to St. Mary, a little Iberia, certainly Bayou Lafourche, and maybe Plaquemine, but no question you're connected to New Orleans. So this is the sediment history of the Mississippi River. Now, if we start thinking of this region, before 1865, there were very few white settlers here. The Spanish colonial period was from 1763 to 1802. In short, New Orleans was discovered by the French, built by the Spanish, and owned by the Italians. So there is a quick summary of New Orleans culture history. So property in this parish and elsewhere can be traced back to Spanish land grants. But the Acadiens arrived around the high ridges of the northern part of the parish in 1765 under the Spanish rule. The Indians, probably Choctaw, or if you like, First People, settled on the bayou south of Houma in about 1776. Sounds like an important date in American history, but I don't know. And in addition, in 1822, there were less than 2,000 people in the parish. It was organized. Houma became the county or parish seat. But even in 1950, there was only 11,000 people within this parish. We have to deal with water. Water is a form of transport, but you want to think about people. Water plays a great deal. We had 2 major floods, one in 1882. The one in 1927 convinced the U.S. government we should build levees. But what you need to recognize, those 2 flooding events submerged 57,000 square miles. But note, we flooded an area slightly smaller than the state of Illinois. And one of the mechanisms at work is what is called a crevasse. Some of you may know it as a crevasse. If you know Terrebonne Parish, no flood. No major floods. Not the flood of 1927, not the flood of 1882. Why? Well, you're slightly higher, and you understand what's the difference between a swamp and a marsh? 18 inches. That's all. Oh, but we're subsiding 18 inches. Whoops. Think about it. That being said, we had to, in some cases, stop a crevasse, so just park a steamboat in the channel. So this is the hydrology we're dealing with. And there are two dominant features here. Northern part, swamp. South, large marsh habitat. How do you define a marsh? A sea of grass. Or if you're an engineer, it's something that can't make up its mind if it wants to be land or water. Think about it. That being said, we can start looking at maps, and you'll note up in where the arrow is, low, uninhabited marsh. Now, I know some people in here are probably recreation-oriented. I bet you got a camp in this low, uninhabited marsh. It's a surveyor's nightmare. It was a police officer's nightmare. Hell, it was everybody's nightmare because you couldn't get there. Well, we'll point that out in just a moment. Well, that being said, when we look at the wetlands, it's actually an industrial frontier. So the coastal plain, indeed, has the continent's most complex rural cultural landscape anywhere in the United States. Highly diverse. And as a result, it's kind of fun. So how are we going to organize this? And I have to understand something here. I just can't do this in a chronological order. I got to kind of back around time. So we're going to agriculture, fishing, trapping, commercial hunting, government service, industry, recreation, and sometimes a little bit of both. But we all recognize the significance of agriculture. You'll note the buggy. Now, this is not Amish land. This is not Mennonite. This is in Taft, Louisiana. You'll also note the use of mules. What's the difference between a mule and a donkey? A donkey is the only animal that can see all 4 feet. Next time you go to the Grand Canyon, want to go to the bottom, I bet you ride a donkey. The federal government doesn't want the lawsuits. That being said, this is all, except that one, from Terrebonne Parish. So what we have here is a landscape that has some high land. In my business, we call them natural levees. Natural levees support less than 10% of the parish crop population, and these green areas are the only place we could really have pasture land, or sugarcane land, or cotton land. And yet, when we think of it, there are 5 critical nodal points, settlements, if you will, all radiating south of Houma: Bayou de Large, Grand Caillou, Petit Caillou, Little Caillou for those of you who aren't from here, Terrebonne, and Bayou Pointe-aux-Chenes. That being said, when you start looking at the settlements, when you go south of Houma, it's easily summarized. These are the trapper, farmer, fisher folk. These are the people that on occasion are called subsistence living. No, they just live out of the very large chest freezer. What's the first thing they teach their kids? Hunt, fish, how to fix a boat, get a motor, and let's go build a garden. And the garden's got to be 2 acres. That's no exaggeration, because you know what they're going to do? They're going to give it to everybody. That's called lagniappe. It's very important for all the people live, as they say, down the bayou, as those that live up the bayou. And then there are the people that live at the end of the road. So we think about that, and what we have is this mix of agricultural activities and housing. Now, this is a house that's made of bousselage entrepotteau, mud and mud mixture, or if you like, it's similar to adobe. And you'll note the use of palm fronds for the roof has to have a cistern, outdoor chimney, and this is in Terrebonne Parish. It's one of the last surviving M houses. Another example. Oh, by the way, why did they paint the front white? Come on, you've seen it. Now tell me why it's done. And it's done. I have seen students move when I was at Nichols in the house, and you know the first thing they did? Paint the front of the house white. Why? That's the way my granddaddy taught me. Papa or paper. Why? Well, when these houses were built, look, Timber was hard to get, so you had a pit saw. And you built everything for every place but the porch. But Cajun folks, being what Cajun folks are, it looked ugly. Paint it white. And to this day, they will paint it white. And what color is this right up there? Blue. Why? Hornets won't live there. And it's true in New Orleans. It's true in Savannah, Georgia. It's true in Charleston. And of course, north of Terrebonne, Houma, we had the sugar industry. Schaffer House, some of you know Margaret Schaffer. Well, some of this material is coming from, from Little Miss Margaret. And I have her permission to say that. I have lived in libraries in Terrebonne Parish. So you have sugar industry, 88 sugar houses. These are not big sugar houses. They were a mill, a mule going around in circles. But it still counted, and this is a very rare photograph taken on Bayou DeLarge of the last small one farm. So cotton was a crop until 1794. Transportation, sugar cane by barge, sugar cane by wagon, sugar cane by, well, that's actually cotton, by steamboats. And the sort of modernization of the sugar industry was in lockstep with the age of industrialization, and used the term barrel. What's a barrel of shrimp? What's a molasses barrel? What's a hog head? Who made the barrel? We'll get to that. That being said, the Lower Terrebonne Sugar Refinery was at Montague. Note, operated its own railroad, 4 locomotives, 500 sugar cars, 30 miles of track. Anybody here been to Disneyland? Anybody here been to Disney World? Have you been Six Flags over Texas? Where do you think the locomotives came from? Give you a hint, you're living there. Part of them. So what we have then is a clicker problem and another clicker problem. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a uniform malfunction. We won't go there. So we have then the movement to market is the backstory. To keep all of the stuff, you need wheelwrights, horses, mules, carts. You need all shapes, sizes. You have harnesses. You need leather people, manufacturers, saddlery. But have any of you ever thought about where the saddle came from your great-granddaddy has in his barn? It didn't come from Texas. And you had to move cattle. Cattle moved from East Texas, across Louisiana, across the Atchafalaya, to Plaquemine, and to New Orleans. But there was also a cattle industry here. In fact, the largest cattle industry in this state is not North Louisiana. It's the coastal parishes. Just go to Cameron. Well, that being said, 4 hooves made a difference. There is a reason they're called Teamsters. Giddy up. And if you look at the logo, there are 2 mules even today. And also mule skinners, and I had to tell my granddaughter they weren't really cutting up mules. Well, that being said, what we have then is carts, wagons, blacksmith. In fact, the brand wall in Homa's blacksmith is now in the Rural Life Museum, and he's not here, but I'll give him credit. Chris Sinek, imagine that. And this is actual work in Terrebonne Parish. Wagons, carts, mules. But movement to market also was by boat, steamboats, no engines, no motors. And you had a tow rope, tow line. You also could call it a line that was done by animals. And you pulled up the bayou, because everything is what? Sail. And that's called the cordel. It's simply a trail that allows you to pull a load upriver. In 1791, the French market originated, Native American post. From there, it evolved into cultural and communication hub. I could randomly go through this audience, and if you are a 3rd, 4th, or 5th generation, I will bet somebody was in a boat going to New Orleans. Which reminds me, I'm not going to ask anybody in here. I work with Dr. Carl Brasso. He's a real humble man. He's published just short of 60 books. His granddaughter, last born, his 12th generation that lived no more than 50 miles from the ancestral home. I bet there's a few of you in here that don't live too far. Now, what I want you to think about, any place in the other part of the United States you can say that? It's all right to be different. It's all right to be first. So when you think about region and shrimping, you had to make land. Remember, they ain't enough. So we got into the drainage and reclamation business. We still are. And there was some really important land barons. J.B. Watkins owed 960,000 square miles. Ed Wisner, almost 1 million. His legacy is what you know as LL&E. Henry Lutcher, as in Lutcher Moore Lumber Company, Lutcher, Louisiana. So when you look at all of these people, they just own Rhode Island. So why? Well, you had to convince people that made land is a way that they can expand and get a few nickels in their pockets, so we have these well-designed reclamation projects. And most of New Orleans is part of a made land. I mean, after all, we talked about levees. You know, New Orleans Airport is the only airport in the United States below sea level. Isn't that comforting? And how many times have you been in the French Quarter and looked up at the boat and say, is the little Dutch boy got his finger in the dike? Oh, yeah. Méchant, he got it. So if you think about this for a moment, this is how you reclaim the marsh. Highly systematized. And I just learned Terrebonne Parish had their own dredge. You have to keep the channels. So you say, well, Don, this is transportation. Well, think, you're in a business of moving water. I think that defines transportation. You are moving water to keep you dry. There's a non-published study, I have known a copy, that between Terrebonne and Lafourche, there's at least 600 pumps. Now, I'm not telling you they're big pumps. There's 600 pumps. And if you've ever been out to Bayou Pointe-à-Chien, you get on the Bayou Road, and there it is. Park. So that is an integral part of this whole transportation industry. But then there's the economic side, fishing. And if you'll note, Bay Junip oysters, we have a great industry that goes back to New Orleans when they were making baskets in order to trap river shrimp. And that food was called drunkard's food. Keep that in mind. Because shrimp was useless. Now, if I grew up where spaghetti had to have meatballs, it wasn't right, meatballs. I come to Louisiana and get shrimp spaghetti. Say what? Huh? No. Or better yet, oyster spaghetti. I'll run that, just keep that in mind. So what we're saying is, as people who are tied to the land, you used its product not because you were Italian, but because you had the product to use and you used it creatively. So we have then, beginning about 1870s, the arrival of Chinese. And I have a documentation. There's one Chinese individual, he moved to New York. He named one son Louisiana. He named the other son Terrebonne. Do you think he was impressed with the region? By the way, have you ever heard this story? So when you think of the Chinese, don't simply think of, Gwen Wong's restaurant in Thibodaux. Oh, here we go. Showtime. Well, what happened is the Chinese moved in and they established shrimp drying platforms. They had to literally get approval of essentially the king, if you will, of China to let a Qadi learn the process. And the process probably had some saltpeter in it. And so we have moved this whole industry from California to Louisiana. Why is it significant? Wait for it. That internationalized shrimp. When you dried shrimp, your market was the world. Why? Shelf life, 8 years. All she had to do is dehydrate it, add water. How many of you here have heard United Fruit? The banana man, all right? Well, his property's in Central America. He brought bananas in. What did he take out? Dried shrimp. Because you could rehydrate it, add water, and their diet was largely rice, beans, and you had a source of protein. So we have this connection, and consequently, if you know where Oyster Bayou is, the only picture I found that shows the concentration, we don't know how many. I've got a pretty good number. But this is all because you were people of the land and you weren't afraid of hard work. Because all of the shrimp up until 1915 was done by seine crews. Now remember that, seine crews. So you went out and you seined, you dried, and you shipped to market. 98% went to China. And one of the companies involved is Bloom & Bergeron. Bloom & Bergeron is 100 years old. T. Baker Smith and Son, now TBS, is 100 years old. Bourgeois Meat is 120 years old. Davison Hardware, 100 years old. Find me another community this small has 400-year-old companies that are still in the business. This is the oldest privately owned shrimp drying wholesaler in a family in the world. Oh, in Homa. Ponder that. Now, transportation, it got to China some way. So when you think about this, this is the barrel heads. Remember the word barrel. This is how it was shipped. And this map shows a snapshot of the distribution of shrimp through Bloom & Bergeron around the world. So with that happening, we know in 1870s, the Chinese, 1865, a family in New Orleans, Dunbar, successfully canned a shrimp. They actually could put it in a can. And 1810, 1901, we get a tin can. It is not made of tin. It's made of steel with about a 0.0006 inch layer of tin. It's important because of colorization change. So in New Orleans, the company built between 1907 these huge manufacturing sites for tin. And it's a highly mechanized process. Now they use electricity. Before they used steam. So we have the shrimp drying industry, a shrimp industry. About the same time appears manufactured ice. So we in this state, we developed the first canned shrimp patented, and we developed the first manufactured ice. So if you're a seine crew, you're moving a product to New Orleans, you better have ice or you're going to throw it overboard a lot of times. Oysters were often thrown overboard 3 times, waiting for tides to freshen them up. And then you get block ice, 500 pounds of block ice. Trust me, when they loaded that, they were not being managed by OSHA. Can you imagine what happens when you drop that? Your boat is going to sink. And that was standard. The reason is it's easier to hand ship it than let it be as small grains and melt. So we now have ice. We have an ice boat. Guaranteed this cruise these are sail crews now, got the ice they needed. We actually had companies with pendants and flags basically buying by one cannery. And even McElhaney, which you know for Tabasco, had a large canning operation. Note, on the site, cans, canning factory, and note this word. Note this word, and I'm sorry you can't read it, that says Avery Island. Why would you care about Baltimore? And what the heck is a cove oyster? But what we find is, first of all, you have to move it. Now that's boxes, shooks, packing boxes, crates, lumber. This is actually by the McElhaney Company. They're buying shook. Shook is nothing more than a barrel stave, the little rib, or it's all the barrel staves in one unit for one barrel. Because barrels were mightily important, and if you'll just take a look at this upper corner in New Orleans, because liquids, grains were all put in barrels. So from McElhaney accounts, we know that at one time they shipped 20,000 barrels of oysters a month. That's a pretty good load. And further, women were paid by the bucket. It was a form of being paid by the pound. You were called by a whistle. The Bohemians from Baltimore, some of them are now still here, like the Jastrzemski family. They got here because they were asked to work in the oyster industry. They had the skills because they worked in the Baltimore oyster industry. And so what we have then is this dynamic creation of oysters, a dynamic creation of shrimp. We're in the business, but they were paid with tokens, which is script, if you're familiar. I worked so hard at the company store took only their script. So oyster bottoms certainly have been mapped. More importantly, 18 years after the establishment of New Orleans, 18 years after the Louisiana Purchase, we were selling oyster shells in New Orleans. 18 years, 1805. All right. So what we then have are luggers, oyster saloons. We're beginning to develop a market beyond the local market. And these are known as descarriadores. They unloaded the oysters. They're all Sicilians, all sailboats. And this is really hard to find. And I want to publicly thank Chris Sinak for making sure that stays available for us historians. Some part of the regions, St. Bernard Parish, and the lugger became known as a schooner. And you hand-tonged oysters. Now, let's put this in perspective. When immigrants came into the United States on the East Coast, they went through Ellis Island. When they arrived in this country, did they have any currency? Nope. They had a cardboard suitcase. How could you make money? You got a scow, hand tongs, and went to work in the river. And you got the income you needed to pay for your tenement bedding. So these are just some general thoughts. They lived out in the marsh. You finally got a dredge. The hatchet is critical. But simultaneously, we're getting a railroad. Now, the Illinois Central, we also had several others. This is probably one of the most important because it went New Orleans north, and we're going to have to say something nice here. You could take this railroad and go all the way to the West Coast, and you could go to the East Coast. Now your market expands dramatically. You're no longer limited to Iberia, St. Mary, Terrebonne, Lafourche, Plaquemine, or New Orleans. And so you have Wells Fargo. You know Wells Fargo is a guy on a horse delivering the mail. They had a huge network, that and Federal Express. And how do you market shrimp beyond this region? How does a housewife in 1901 in Idaho know how to fix shrimp when they've never seen one and they don't know if they like a can? You put a recipe on it. You find today that cans will have a recipe for a reason to convince you to buy it. Brilliant marketing before marketing was taught in any graduate school. And to show you the significance, this is about 1920 in New Orleans, and the boat designs, and you have to have a label. The labels came from the Wally Company in New Orleans, and I'd just like to point out to you the multiple colors. This is masterful marketing. You are the Dunbar Company. You are only packing shrimp in a can. How do you convince people to buy your can? Put a different label on it. Fair enough? Tung oil is tung oil. I don't care what it's called. Gas is gas. If it's 87 octane or 89 octane, it's still gas. What's the difference? Additives. Oh, yeah, you believe that. So here we are. Now, why? I'm going to point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 grocers in the same city buying the same shrimp with a different label. Why is that important? He can put his on sale and they don't have to. It's brilliant. And it was started by the Audemars family right here in Grand Caillou. So here is the distribution of shrimp around this country between 1876 and 1901, And note, Hawaii got Louisiana canned shrimp in 1878. How do they know? How do people in Hawaii, why would they care? Drove us bloody nuts. What happens is the middleman, the jobbers. The jobbers took shrimp on consignment, shipped it by boat to Hawaii, and then it was auctioned. So look at Vermont. Look at Maine. Oh, wait a minute, Don. Hot damn, you missed it. When did Henry Ford invent the assembly line? 1913. So how was this delivered with all of this beautiful artwork? Well, you were selling cove oysters. Where did that term come from? It took a colleague and I a little time to find out, but it's Cove Street, Baltimore. This became cachet. It's like when you say Coke, it doesn't necessarily mean one that's bottled by the Coca-Cola bottling company. You say Kleenex, you do not say facial tissue. Is that fair? Well, that was just marketing 101 at work. So when we go and look at the canneries, using the labels, we have identified 210 canneries. In no year did the state record more than 30. These are ephemeral. Some come, some go, they die. And in Homa, there were 22. Through time, never all at once. So you got canneries, and then you come across Barataria shrimp. It's like cove oysters. There is no species of shrimp called Barataria. I got news, it ain't right. Well, why? When the Dunbar Company canned the first shrimp, they canned it as Barataria shrimp. And that, like Coke, Kleenex, became really important. So it was symbol of quality. And therefore, regardless of whether the shrimp was caught in Barataria, the name was used. In 1918, it had to change. Well, you delivered, and the wagons were called dray. It's simply a wagon that had sides that you could move, a short cart, a wagon. So when you got all of that canned shrimp or oysters on the railroad at a railroad siding, how did you get it to the grocer? Well, that's easy. Well, we're working on it. That's like the Cajun fella. They said, I'm going to the moon. No, I'm going to the sun. If you're going to the sun, man, yeah, I'm going to the sun. You can't go to the sun. You burn up. Man, sure, I'm going at night. Well, with that, you have to have motors. Now, I fully recognize for the electricians in here that Edison, Tesla, and Westinghouse made a motor electrified. But these are engines, you all. Don't make any mistake about it. And some, of course, became diesel. You had a gasoline launch. You would recycle automobile motors. You know, when you hear this name between motors and engines, are we going to change the name from General Motors to General Engine? Or how about Ford Motor Company, Ford Engine Company? Or better yet, motoring in history. So we have to be careful at the time difference. Then there are the luggers. Then we get an otter trawl. Whoops, 1917. Canned shrimp, 1868, 1870. All by Sains for 50 years. So we are working with people that know their hands, know how to work with their hands. This is called a Balexian. It is a type of lugger in which the wheelhouse is to the back. It was designed by Jocko Kovacevic in Biloxi. Lafitte skiff, the two people there, one a Dufresne, one a Pierce, but it's small. Now the trick with a Lafitte skiff, and some of you know, you want a 355 Hemi or something that big because you don't want to catch shrimp, you want to outrun them. And I've been thrown all over one because, you know, I'm the college professor, and they smile and they goose it, and I just almost come out the boat. But it is a very fast, efficient shrimp tool. Now, at Fernandina Beach in Florida is the birthplace of what we're going to call the modern shrimp industry. Italians, Greeks, Teleakis, Dianos, they built what is known as the super trawler. You know them as steel hulls. And the Floridan, or Floridane. And many of you have heard Cajuns talk a Balexian or a Floridian. Well, wheelhouses to the front, that's jumbo shrimp. And although Morgan City likes to pat herself on the back, they captured the first one. I don't think so. It's either in Terrebonne or Lafourche. That being said, there's the Popier. Many of you know the Popier, lazy man's fishing mechanism. So when you think of South Louisiana, Terrebonne Parish, transportation, well, you transfer voice, you transfer electricity, but has it ever occurred to you, how did you order your shrimp? Western Union. There are no telephones. You develop a peeling machine. Many of you know the Lapine family. Family born, raised in where? Houma. And their operation is in Harahan. Paradigm shift, completely. No longer did you need human hands. And now we're looking at bi-direct. David Chauvin. So when the highways came along, the highways had to follow the rest of the natural levees as well as the green space. And by 1925, we start to get a grid. Now, some of you have heard the legend that Huey Long established Louisiana's highway system. Like Huey did so many times, he didn't quite tell the truth. Indeed, the highway system was started by the federal government, but he was never one not to take credit. In fact, there were no bridges. There were only 2 bridges in the state of Louisiana in the 1920s. So we look at this map, and when I call your attention to no roads circa 19. So trucks become commonplace and moving products. Swanson introduced TV dinners in 1953. Quickly, it became commonplace. Why? We developed refrigerated trucks. And I know there's some people in here that have had more than one Swanson TV dinner. Look at their heads like bobblehead dolls in the back of a Chicano car. That's right, because we forget we're that generation. She is the one that got phones without wires. Hell, we thought Dick Tracy was a joke. Hello, this is Dick Tracy. Smile, and that's what they do. Technology never changes. It just gets better. So if we think about this, we have trucks, we have boats, and this is so funny. We were delivering 50-gallon drums of diesel to the docks because there's no roads that the boats could use to get to the docks. I love that picture. Well, in this parish, you have T. Baker Smith and Sons, TBS. Graduated Tulane 1908 or 9. Establishes TBS 1913, you now have a surveyor. Because when you leave a bayou, everything has to be surveyed. What's the smallest plot a surveyor will ever mark out? Cemetery plot. It's the truth. And I'm not going to put it, you can make a good living at that too, because people like to die and make sure they own the property forever. We forget that. So we have to have some way for public works, survey people. So land travel was limited to horse, bicycle, and an early automobile that has a starter. That's my uncle, that's my mother, and that's 750 miles northwest, just out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Don't believe that this is not a national problem. We're just talking about Louisiana at the moment. And then this is a very rare photo. It's actually on Bayou Terrebonne. It's called a jerg. It's a standing skiff, very common at Pier Park. And then we have to have roads, bridges, public works, levees. Now, you know the answer, but did the road come before the church or the church come before the road? Church got there first. I mean, we call it parish, and it is ecclesiastical, so you got to be careful. The Lord is watching. So here we go. Now we have to have ways to get from A to B. And if you'll note, this, whatever it is, a boat, and right up there is a car about 1930, 1918, 19 in Terrebonne Parish. So the roads then allowed you to move product into New Orleans. In addition to that, we have the trapping industry. The trapping industry was dynamic. The parish was one of the largest centers of traffic in the parish. And entire families went out into the marsh and they lived during the trapping season. The kids had to come back and, as they say, quote, catch their classes or catch their books back. And it was a way that you could add significantly to your income. They built a small, in southwestern Louisiana, it's called a pirogue trail. Over here, it's called a traîneau. Lived in the marsh, isolated, and consequently, they had another form of income. That income had to go to buyers. You may recognize the Mahler name. Big Al's, have you ever been there when the back got a big freezer? Might be a few alligators in it. It's a rumor. So then you are selling to New Orleans and then going to a worldwide market. Today, Gucci and others are buying up as many alligators as they can. Then there is market hunting. Now the rumor is Chauvin at one time was a center of the feather industry because women hats had to have feathers. I'm not sure I believe that, but we certainly had a very viable industry. These are called punt guns. They're basically cannons. You didn't hold it to your shoulder. You mounted it on your boat, tied the boat down, because when you fired, you're going to wound, cripple, or kill probably 50 ducks. So duck, you could buy live decoys. And it didn't last long, but it was certainly important. This is not in Louisiana, but I got it because of the barrels. That's how you ship the ducks to market. And note the price. I mean, this is just before the Civil War, and you're going to get pair of mallards, $1.75. Now, you want to do the math at how much that was when you got 100 mallards? Think about it. This was a good way to make a living. And the rule was if you missed, oh, you weren't good. No. How many of you know the name Dick Cheney? Huh? You know the name Dick Cheney. He's hunting on the Chenier Plain. And he's hunting with some good old boys. Really good old boys. And Secret Service are mad at the good old boys because they don't play by the Secret Service rules. So the Secret Service said, the good old boy said, would you like to shoot clay pigeons? Oh, yeah. Well, they're good with street machine guns, but they cannot shoot one at a time. They clean their clock. All right? Now, Dick Cheney couldn't commit suicide with a shotgun. He's that bad of a shot. So the good old boy fellow said, look, let me shoot. Well, you can't shoot. You don't have a shotgun. He reaches behind the blind and said, sure I do. Oh, the Secret Service soiled their pants. It was amazing. So why? Well, you are ruining my reputation. What do you mean? Among the guides, if you don't win, they get harassed all year. It doesn't make any difference if you're the Vice President of the United States. Has that? Oh, they didn't know. And they had scuba. They brought scuba divers into the marsh. Think about it. This is a little better than flotant. They can't even go down and get their cakes wet. It's hysterical, but true. So then there's the government service, and you're going to hear about blimp bases. Lumcon works. In addition, the industries for logging, moss, menhaden, oil. Logging, moss, menhaden, oil, the logging industry. Well, starting in 1849 with the Swampland Act, 1850, northern investors came in and they bought up swampland. Why? Because they had denuded the forest in Michigan, Minnesota, etc. So they were down here to cut timber. And they were really good at cutting timbers. Now, this is a floating road. Then, all right? Now, Acadie were not particularly good axe people. I'm not saying they couldn't use an axe, but they were really good at finding timber. And same thing, if you think about it, The oil industry finds oil in a marsh. They don't know how to get there. So a large number of people made a very good living as the boat people ferrying people in and out of the marsh. And then there are the mills. In this parish, it's at Donner, Diver, Stark and Brown, Patterson, and what you have then is an industry cutting cypress. But what was the cypress primarily used for? And I set you up, most people never get it. Railroad ties. Now I'm going to build the ties. I'm cutting the ties, right? Well, those are railroad ties. Why? Well, the railroad doesn't want to change the ties, and if you read a graphic, it says wood eternal. There are a Maronite Christian church in Lebanon that have cypress doors that are 2,000 years old, and they still work. The hinges are a little bad, but they still work. So you see then that we have to move product. So when you start looking at the oil and gas industry early on, what product was being manufactured? Kerosene. I won't ask us hands, but how many of your families' first light was kerosene? Yep. All over the country, though. And this is called case oil. That piece of wood is cypress, and it was from Amelia, where Texas company, you know it as Texaco, developed the ability. And then Spanish moss. Spanish moss was used by the Acadiri, Cajun folks, to stuff their mattresses. It could be made and woven into a blanket. Henry Ford, first automobile, put in the seats Spanish moss. And people bought it, and they were having a little problem. I mean, it was a really big problem, and it was not fun. The first recall in American history was moss that hadn't been cleaned well and put into, it was not fun. Can you imagine? I got a brand new car. I can't sit in it. So you note that you have then, this is a jug, and the one that I show you is very rare. And indeed, cypress is the wood eternal. And some people have made a very good living advertising themselves. And so what we have then, the largest industry by weight is Menhaden, or you know it as Pogge, and it's for its oil. If you have lipstick, it probably has Menhaden oil in it. And it is a very large industry. And then you have oil, natural gas, sulfur. You have huge oil fields. The first field, they say, was in Jennings. Wrong. It's in Evangeline. And if I had the ability to speak French, I'd have been given a chance to take a photograph of it. It's still there, but they guard the site. And then what is the mechanism that clues salt domes, subsurface and surface? And then once you moved in the 1930s into the wetlands, you needed a flotilla boat. You needed all kinds of help. Then you got into the marsh. You had to gain access, so you dig canals. In addition, eventually, most people don't know this, oil and or gas is produced in every parish in the state, including Orleans. Other than Oklahoma, we're the only state that can say that. Oklahoma has missed it by one. Yeah, well, they can't throw touchdowns either. So when we eventually look at oil and gas, this is state data. Took a while to create. This is a map, very detailed map of oil and gas within this parish. And then the sulfur's the forgotten, and the sulfur mine. Throughout the 1950s up into the 1990s, sulfur was certainly an important product. But at the same time, we're starting to come out of the Depression, and we get the REA. We are now looking at electricity. Oh, maybe you're not going to have to use a kerosene lamp. Maybe you don't have to go buy a little mantle so you would have light in your house. My grandmother had one light bulb and never running water. So what we find is, right up to World War II, we're beginning to get a telephone. Now, how many in this room had a party line? Really? I love it. Look at you, right? And you knew who was listening. Would you quit breathing? I'm trying to talk. I remember my mom and dad going through this whole thing. Party line. And my granddaughter has a phone that she could call anybody in the world and has no idea what a party line is. That's all right. That's called science. But it's not immediate. It happened right about the time we were in World War II, and we got into rationing. This is kind of rare, but that's my ration book as a baby. And my mom and dad were glad I was born because all food was rationed. Now you say, well, you're talking about transportation. Yeah, how did the World War II troops get fed? Beef, right? Beef. What percentage of American males were in World War II? Maybe close to 50. I've read bigger numbers. This is not trivial. Why do you bring it up? Because you had to introduce the capability to this public of ours to save products. Now, they saved rubber. They didn't need to save rubber. They saved rubber so you wouldn't drive because Pat needed gas. That's simple. So we then start thinking about this a moment. Whoops. Hello, show. Now, what I'd like for you to look at very carefully, this is a 1944, right out of the newspaper. 1 pound of ground steak was 1/4 of your monthly stamp allowance. 1/4 for a cheap cut of meat. Jumbo shrimp, not rationed. How do you think that affected shrimp production from the shrimpers in this parish and every other? You now had a market all over the United States, and you didn't have to give up your stamps. So it was hugely important and largely overlooked. So the government implemented rationing. The Japanese controlled most of the words 10. You needed 10 cans. And what happened? The congressional delegations convinced folks that we needed shrimp canneries working at full capacity. And note prices at the time. Well, after World War II, we get the development of freezing. Now, freezing technology has been around a while, and consequently, when you got freezing, your market become very robust because during World War II, you had meatless days. And this is the shrimp production during the war. And then you move for the push for oil offshore. And that was tremendously important. And recreation. Now, how big is the recreation industry in Louisiana? Nobody knows. But I look around here. How many people in here don't own a shotgun? Don't put up your hands. Look at that. Do I need to say anything? Right? A man will get divorced before he give up his boat. I've interviewed people. I've interviewed a man, and his wife was asked to move with her mama, and it was 4 miles, and he didn't do it. How many of, it is very commonplace. So you get involved with all of the activities associated with hunting. You get a hunting club. This is the oldest continuous occupied hunting club. It's not in Terrebonne. It's Chef Mantour. It's called the Tally Ho. You come back from World War II, and you get the GI Bill. Now, most people think the GI Bill allowed you to go to college. It allowed you to get an education in anything. You could be an engineer, or you could be a truck. You could fix cars, trucks, anything, and the federal government help you out. Note, it was closed for the duration. So when you go down, and some of you know exactly where this is, but I've never figured out how you go 11.5 miles per hour. So where the road ends, the fishing begins. Now, to put this in perspective, this is the Purdy Firearm Company. Now, Purdy Firearms, like H&H, are the creme de la creme. Now, my lovely bride here tolerated her husband to go into London and find a Purdy Firearm Company. I go in, introduce myself. Nice people. But I'm a little worried about people who are selling guns that have suits on and ties. and very nice. Said, I'd like to see your book on a number of pretty firearms sold in Louisiana. We could get it for you. It's not digital, and they're in binders. So, well, I guess I'm not going to do that. So I go to Richard Lipsey. Some of you know the name. I mean, Mr. Richard. Well, he's not there. So I talked to his good buddy. I said, how many Purdy firearms are sold in Louisiana that you know of without even blinking? A dozen. Oh, by the way, that's a used Purdy firearm. It translates at $390,000 for a gun that shoots one shot. Now that's recreation defined. Fair enough? So it's all, and you got to have a lease. Oh, you got to have two leases. You got to have one for what? Duck. And one for deer. Poor Bambi doesn't have a chance. And then we start talking about environmental issues. And the environmental issues are well beyond our discussion about transportation. But we have to be aware of hurricanes. We have to think in 2002 to 22, Isidore, Lily, Cindy, Katrina, Rita, Gustav, Ike, Isaac, Barry, Zeta, Ida. Now, I don't want anybody killed, but folks, it's time for somebody else to get one for the team. And now it's becoming commonplace. Hurricane Katrina was one example. Hurricane Ida is another. So this landscape is and always has been a working coast. The coast is not a place but a process. It only becomes a place when people live here. Now you're on the coast. Because if nobody lives here, why would you care? So you live here, and I'd like to leave by simply saying life can only be understood backwards, but we must live it forwards. History does not lie, only those that try to interpret it. Now, if there are any questions, I would like to thank the committee, and I'll be happy to answer. Well, no questions. I'll just keep going. It's not a problem. Turn the lights back off, please. I'm not necessarily into self-promotion. This book was just recently published. It's a very detailed history of Louisiana shrimp. It has been well received. I only bring it up because there's a lot of people in here that have shrimp connection. I'd like to introduce my granddaughter. My granddaughter is going to have available forms that you can use to order this book, but I'd also like to point out that this week alone, from May 2nd to May 9th, this $40 book is $18. You buy 3, no shipping, and what you're going to get is something that is pretty interesting. But what I'd like you to do, you need to remember this or you go online. And again, I'm not in self-promotion, but I can tell you it has received a lot of kind words. I have copies if you'd like to look at it. Yeah, we can do that, but what I'd like to point out one moment. All right, yes, please. We are now working on a manuscript that deals with blue crab. It has never been looked at in the detail that we plan to do it. So what I'd like to point out is any sort of miscellaneous paper goods, old invoices. All of you in here know that the blue crab you buy in Baltimore comes from Dulac. When's the first truck going up there? I know in the 30s I have their information. I want to know the owner of the truck. No, if we have that, we have made a huge contribution to unraveling this myth that Baltimore has the crab. When you go, and I've done it, I've gone back and looked at the boxes. They come from Louisiana. But the service guy, he weighs about 12. He has no clue. That's wrong. So if you have anything, my wife is right here. She got a little notepad. You can catch her. Come on. Old photos, stories, canned crab material. You know, one of the problems, and I know with this age group that we've had, We're trying to find a can, an original can. Do you know how hard it is? I won't say the name. There was an oyster can from Homa that sold for $2,265. One can. Why? Because all the Cajun took the labels off and put them over their tomato plants. I can't get it. Yeah, right? All of them. So if you have things, don't throw it away. Just call me. Let me take a picture. And it'll make a big difference as we try to sort out the intricacies of the blue crab industry, because it's been ignored. And with that, my wife will take name and number. My granddaughter has given out propaganda. It's been my pleasure. And maybe gave you some knowledge, and if I entertained you a bit, well, that kept you awake, kept it helpful.
All right. Well, thank you, Doc. It was very, very interesting and fun as usual. So how about another hand for our speaker? Now I'd like to, as he touched a little bit up on the airport, we have a real good history of the airport. We got some wonderful pictures. And I want to introduce Josh Alfred. Josh was able to get from the airport facility a copy of the blimp back, the hangar, and this is the implosion, a film of when they blew the top off the building. So Andrea did the work. Yes. Okay. So anyway, this is it, and so this is Andrea. How many years? 23 years.
All total about 24 years.
24 years at the airport. She's the one that helped us get all these pictures together and do it. So I don't know if you want to say anything, Josh?
This is the implosion of the blimp base. So it's a pretty interesting video, and I knew it was out there somewheres, and I told Andrea to find it, and she did. So it's very interesting, and I'll let Andrea talk.
For those of you that don't know, the Homa Terrebonne Airport started as what it is today in 1958. But prior to that, it was a naval land installation base. And like O'Neill said earlier, it was a blimp base, and everybody knows it as the blimp base. So the blimp base was put into place in the 40s for World War II. We were home to a naval air station base. A lot of the old buildings are beginning to be destroyed. Some were destroyed back then, but there are still a few of them out there if you ride through the airport, where Hercules Wire Rope is located, the Osaya building, the Airport Commission building that we used to be in, which is now the Levee District, is actually in one of the pictures that you'll see of the entire blimp base that we have over here. So we do still have some of that history, even though a lot of it is going away. And this was sent to us many years ago, and when Josh said, there's a video of them exploding that blimp hangar, I'm telling you there's a video, and I'm going, Josh, I don't know where it is, you know? So finally, I started digging, and I found an email from 10, 12 years ago with a link that was broken. So then it was dig. And so here's the product when they're talking about how after, with the war and everything, how the military was going from blimps to more power, and it'll show you the actual explosion of our blimp hangar.
America's Air Force puts on its biggest display to show the world what's new up above. President Truman and General Eisenhower go to Maryland to get a close look at the latest six-jet bomber. To catch the world's fastest bomber, take the world's fastest fighter, the F-86. With the Atlantic Pact drawing America still closer to the defense of Western Europe, the completion of these new transcontinental bombers, capable of carrying 44-ton blockbusters, means yet another step forward in the United States policy of armed preparedness. To accommodate these giants, new airfields are springing up in every state. In Louisiana, this oversized wooden hangar heads for retirement. 2,000 sticks of dynamite demolish the structure. It housed 3 blimps during the war and now has to make way for a new aerodrome. is cleared for the airfield to take shape.
And that's all, folks. Thank y'all.
Sir, okay.
So we all, oh, go ahead. So it appears, I always wondered why that beautiful, that big blimp base was blown off and they didn't save it. But from what I understand from this video is that it would interfere with the planes going in and out of the runways. But that's all I know. So that was the drag strip, exactly. That was the drag strip.
Somebody got killed out there because they ran it the back way and they ran into the pipes that way.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. All right. Any other questions or anything? Anybody? Gordy, you want to close?
Yeah. Thank you, Neil, Josh, and Don. Thanks for that great presentation. Our next event will be June 7th. It's military and law enforcement. We'll have Gary Phillips, Mort Black, Dana Coleman, Tim Saunier, and Steve Ponville. And look, please get everyone to come to this. These are very interesting. We have about another 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, about another 12 of them. We're going to either do them here at the Civic Center, and we'll announce on the table over here is some event that gives you the dates and all. And anything you want to add, please let us know. Let someone know in this deal. If you have old pictures or something, we'd love to put them up. Please join in and to celebrate the bicentennial of Terrebonne Parish, which we all grew up here, and our mothers, fathers, grandpas, grandmas, etc. So thank you. God bless you. And it looks like Neil wants to say something.
I just want to, in case anybody came after, the little book that we had for the blimp base, I don't see any left, so it looks like we ran out. I'm going to get some more for Andrea at the airport. If any of y'all want to get some more, I'll get you another 20. And Andrea, if you need some more, we'll just print them and bind them. So if anybody needs it, get with Andrea Dupre at the airport, at the office, and we can get some more if y'all need some. If y'all know somebody that wants one, just let us know and we'll do it.
And thank y'all. God bless y'all, and have a great day, and we'll see you at the next event. And of course, in October, we'll have the downtown event with the parade and all. So please keep in touch. Thank you.